everybody. Welcome to this event. It's great to see you. I'm Kirsten Shepard. I'm the Professor of English and Theatre Studies here, and I'm really happy to be introducing this panel and these wonderful guests, and then I will simply vanish, and then they'll take over. So I want to start by introducing Professor Dan Rebellato, who is a fantastic theater maker, scholar, really rare individual in terms of what you do with the theater, for students, for audiences. Dan is a professor of theater at Royal Holloway. His books include 1956 and All That, Theater and Globalization, The Cambridge Companion to British Theatre since 1945, Playwriting, A Backstage Guide, which I strongly recommend. And he's currently working on a book on naturalist theater, but he is also a playwright for stage and audio. Recent plays including Plum in Prison, Restless Dreams, which won Best New Play in British Audio Awards, and a new adaptation of Our Mutual Friend. He's currently working on a play about Theodore Géricault and a contribution to the Harry Potter universe. So very interesting mixture there. And so this report that Dan and David Edgar have written here, which we'll be talking about today, is the latest in a series of Arts Council-funded reports looking at changes to the British theatre repertoire. So it's fantastic to have you, and it's an enormous pleasure as well to introduce Sos Eltis, who will be the host and the interlocutor of this with Dan. And Sos is Professor of English and Theatre Studies here at the University of Oxford and is a fellow of Brasenose College, where she was also vice principal. I'm not sure for how many years. It was
3 years.
3 years. Amazing. And she's actually currently director of admissions for our faculty. So
some evil crime clearly committed in a past life.
Brilliant. Her scholarship on modern and Victorian drama is vast and deep, both things. It includes books on Oscar Wilde and a book on sex on stage called Acts of Desire, and dozens of articles, book chapters, podcasts, legendary lectures on Oscar Wilde that generations of students have loved, continue to love. And so I'm just going to hand over to Sos and Dan. Thank you.
Thank you. And Dan, before you talk us through the report, we're not assuming everybody did their homework and read the entire report. So if you did, well done, fabulous, it'll be a refresher. Can I just ask how this came about? What was the impulse and the funding and the energy behind it?
Yeah, so I've got a sort of weird side hustle as a sort of theatre consultant and analyst, and I've done a number of reports before, all funded by the Arts Council, and looking really sort of statistically at the nature of the repertoire. We did a couple of reports in 2013, 2014, looking at that data. Then there was a bit of a hiatus because the two big organisations that we get our data from, UK Theatre and Society of London Theatre, which are both sort of membership organisations, they totally messed up how they gathered data, so we weren't able to get any data from them for a while. And then that resumed about sort of 5 years ago. And basically what we decided was that, in a sense, rather than just do a single year snapshot, in 2023, when we were talking about this, everyone was talking about the effect that COVID had on British theatre, because, of course, the biggest shutdown of theatres since the 17th century, and lots of people had lots of intuitions and beliefs about what had happened, and we thought it would be useful to actually try and get some data. It's probably worth saying that what the data that we have is basically the box office data. So what that means is we do a bit of tagging of that. So basically we get a kind of big spreadsheet that has the name of the show and when it was performed and how many people attended and how much they spent. We tag that, so we find out who the author was, gender of author, and we start putting it into genre. But beyond that, we don't say anything really. We don't know anything about really what happened on stage. So really interesting questions that people ask are things like, have cast sizes got smaller? And we don't know that because that's just not part of the data that we've gathered or tagged. So it's quite high level statistical data. And as we'll probably talk about, of course, there's also questions of commercial confidentiality. That means that it has to be at quite a high level, because as soon as you get quite granular, you know, if you start saying, how did pantomimes do in the Northeast that were original pantomimes, you're sometimes talking about one pantomime. And if you start talking about the box office information, you're saying how that theatre did. So there are lots of ways we have to slightly anonymise it. But that's basically where we are.
Fabulous. Do you want to take us through it?
Yeah, okay. And so, I mean, it's a fairly hefty report. And so I'm really, and it's too long, actually. There's a slight regret of mine. But so I'm just going to talk about some of the sort of highlights, some of the big things that jumped out at us before we'll then have a little chat about some of it. The first thing I suppose to say is just what the kind of extent of the data is. And this is kind of what the data was like in 2019. In our data, this really, we don't include everything that happens in theatres, because not everything that happens in theatre is theatre. There's lots of stand-up comedy, personal appearances, book signings, these sorts of things. We got rid of all of that. We also got rid of all theatre that only had one performance, just because that tended to slightly skew the data in various ways. A particular theatre that would have a lot of scratch nights would suddenly look as if it was incredibly prolific and producing, 100 shows or something like that. So this is where we end up with, as you can see, 1,671 shows, nearly 43,000 performances, nearly 25 million attendances, and about £1 billion worth of box office. And now what we can do is just look at how those figures changed between 2019 and 2023.
Could I just ask something really important?
Yes.
Is this the whole of the UK or is it this England?
That's a really great question. So UK, so Society of London Theatre, of course, is London. We've got really good data for London. The UK Theatre Network has lots of regional theatres, but it's got slightly patchier attendance. We're less good on Scotland, to be honest. Less good on Northern Ireland. I mean, there's relatively little theatre going on in Northern Ireland, but we don't have quite as much. We're not nearly as good as we are for, let's say, the Southwest or the Northwest. So I'm going to say a little bit about that a little bit later.
This is the UK.
This is the UK.
In as much as you have the data.
That's right. And it's £1 billion worth of box office income. It's a big chunk. It's the commercial end of things. This is what happens in 2023, which is already an important headline. This is how they changed. So what you see is the number of shows shrunk. This is the number of productions on these same theatres, on those stages, went down quite a bit, 14.5% between 2019 and 2023. The number of performances slightly shrunk as well. The number of attendances went up. And the box office, it looks like increased, but actually in real terms, it's a very slight, statistically not very significant drop. So box office about the same, but the number of shows and performances went down, number of attendances went up, which already starts to tell us something about the difference between those two eras. We can look at box office against potential. We can look at what happens, how much box office income do they get compared to what would happen if they sold absolutely every ticket at full price, and then attendance against capacity, number of seats that were filled compared to the complete capacity of all these theatres. And in 2019, it's 69.7%, and attendance is 72.8%. So that is historically pretty good for theatre. That's higher than it was in our earlier data. And this is what happened in 2023. It increased on both measures to nearly 23% and just over 73% and just over 76%. So there's a decline in the number of shows, but actually the number of attendances and the number of seats filled and the amount of box office achieved compared to capacity goes up. One of the big things that people often say, this is anecdotal, but people often say, wow, theatre tickets have got so much more expensive since COVID. And so this is something we really wanted to test. This is the average ticket price in all our theatres in 2019. Just under £42.50 was the average ticket price in every single one of those, however many attendances. And this is where the ticket price is in 2023, £47.91. But of course, there's compound interest between them. If that 2019 figure, £42.50, had gone up with inflation, it would have been £52.06. So in fact, it looks like an 11.3% rise in ticket price. In fact, in real terms, ticket prices were 8% cheaper after COVID than they were before, which was a big surprise to lots of people. What theatre got staged? Okay, so we divide theatre into 7 forms, and those forms I will show you are drama, which is basically plays, old and new plays and devised shows, Christmas shows, pantomimes, we separate those out for various reasons, opera, dance, ballet, physical theatre and musicals. Okay, and pretty much everything fits into one of those, sometimes with a little bit of hammering. And this is how it was in 2019, 57%, you can see, very big drama, musicals 14%, and dance and ballet 14%, everything else is a fairly small amount of that total. And this is how it changed in 2023. You can see dramas reduces quite a bit, and the key thing here is musicals go up to 17% of all productions, and so does dance and ballet. So that's a big change between the 2 years. And then actually, if we look at, we've got other indicators. We've got obviously not just productions, but performances, attendances and box office. And if you look at how they change, this is 2019, this is 2023. The thing that's really obvious is the march of the musical through our data, in the sense that in 2023, it's about, we saw it was 17% of productions, it's about 40% of performances, it's over 50% of attendances, and it's pushing towards 2/3 of all box office. I think it's about 61%. So in other words, for every £1 spent in British theatre in 2023, 61p of it is being spent on a musical, which is not necessarily surprising. But let's look at another couple of things. New work, okay? New work is an important engine for innovation in theatre. And so it's interesting to look at what the percentage change is between 2019 and 2023. So again, using our 4 measures, productions, just under 50% of productions were new work, that is, not revivals of old plays or musicals or whatever. Just over 40% of performances, 30%, and just over 25% of attendances and box office. And this is how it changes in 2023. It actually goes up. New work, we were more likely to be seeing new work in 2023 than we were in 2019. In fact, in terms of productions and performances, 50% or more were new. Can't remember what the next slide is. Oh yeah, there we go. And then if you break that down by theatre form, this is kind of interesting, I think. Again, you've got 7 forms. This is the 50% mark, just for interest. This is how it was in 2019. So you can see that the musical, dance, ballet and opera have a minority of their work being new, whereas drama, physical theatre, pantomime and Christmas are mostly new work. And this is what it was in 2023. Really interestingly, new work increased for most theatre forms as a proportion of the total work that they did. And probably the most significant change here is this, which is the musical. The musical goes from about 1/3 of its productions being new work to over half being new work. And what we actually find when we look at the data is that this push for more new work is almost entirely coming from the musical. So the new musical is a big driver in changes of how the repertoire is looking. What theatre got staged again? So yeah, we can just look at, this is raw numbers of productions, okay, which doesn't say anything about how big the theatre was or how long the run was. It's simply the number of different shows of this type, of these 7 types you could see in 2019. And this is where we get nearly 1,000 different plays and device shows, old and new plays and device shows, and then musical and ballet, quite significant. I'm going to watch this closely because I'm going to animate to show you exactly how it changes between 2023, and just notice where the change happens. So in other words, these barely change at all in terms of raw numbers. The decline, I mentioned there's a decline in the number of productions, of shows, of 14.5%, but is almost entirely a reduction in drama, in reduction of plays and device shows. And in fact, we can look at that in a bit more detail. If we break down the drama figure, in 2019, that is made up of, what is that? That's a sort of 45% new plays, it's another sort of 35% revivals, and the rest are device shows. And if we look at how that changes in 2023, you can see that it's new plays that are being squeezed. So there is clearly something going on in the theatre in 2023 that means that new plays are the things that people are backing away from. There are reasons to do that, and we might talk about that in a moment. New plays in the repertoire, 2019 and 2023. So the overall, like if the whole pie is every show, 30% of those shows in 2019 were new plays. In 2023, that's gone down to 20%, which is a big, big chunk. And actually, if you talk to a lot of playwrights, they will talk about the fact that opportunities have really sort of been narrowed between those periods. So here's the thing. Lots of theatre managers say the thing that's got terrifying about theatre since COVID is that theatre goers are all waiting to the very last minute to buy tickets, which of course is very nerve-jangling because you've got your programme, you don't know whether you're going to go bankrupt until the reviews are out, sort of thing. So we thought we have this data, we know exactly when people bought tickets, so here's another chart. What this shows you is this, these are mutually exclusive. So this is if they bought it less than a week before the performance. This is from a week to a month, to 2 months, 3 months, 4 months, 5 months, and more than 5 months. And this is the overall pattern in 2019 about when people bought tickets. Okay, so they are most likely to actually buy their tickets more than 5 months ahead in 2019, and then it gets a bit more likely as you get close to the performance, and then it sort of drops off slightly as you get very close to the performance. And so we're really interested to see how this had transformed in 2023. And the answer is it hadn't transformed at all, which is really strange. And in fact, when I've done presentations of this to theatre managers, they flatly don't believe that I'm telling the truth. But I think there is kind of explanation behind that. I mean, we're talking about 2023. The theatres closed in 2020, and they were still closed in parts of 2021. So, in fact, in 2022, they had mostly fully reopened. So, and we chose 2023 because we wanted a bit of, we didn't want to sort of have the crisis management phase. We wanted a sense that things might have settled down a bit. But we might think that in 2022, lots of theatres learnt something about their audiences. And if we break down these figures by three theatre forms, this is what we get. This is how people buy drama, plays and device shows. They will buy tickets 5 months before, but not in quite such proportions. And they will much more likely buy their tickets 1 to 4 weeks before the show. Whereas, if we look at musicals, that's quite a different picture. They are very likely, this is a third of the tickets are bought 5 months before. And it's the same with pantomime. So my guess is that what's actually happened is that move to the musical in the repertoire may be I'm not going to say it's motivated by it, I don't want to say what the intention is, but it may be that counteracts the fear that if you put plays on, people are going to wait till the last minute to turn up. So instead you get musicals, which people typically will kind of go, oh, they're doing, Rachel Ziegler's going to be in Evita in a year and a half's time. Let's make that a big outing, which is less likely if you've got a sort of exciting new radical play at the Royal Court that people will book it a year and a half for it. So I think in a sense what we're looking at is people pulling away from plays, perhaps in part because they are slightly more terrifying to program, and they're going towards forms that people are more likely to book earlier for. You have to remember, lots of theatres burnt through their reserves during COVID, so there's a real sort of, it's a big fear of living on the kind of edge of bankruptcy. How did new plays do? I'll do this very quickly. We've got various ways we can look at what you might think is the health of theatre. In 2019, these are the answers to those questions. The average play ran for 19 performances in average auditoriums of 414, filling 68% of their seats, and that's the average box office. And this is how it changes in 2023. Everything increases. So despite the fact that new plays, or perhaps because the number of new plays, it reduces, in fact, they all do better in these economic terms. Okay, I'm not saying anything about the quality of the plays. What plays did we revive? I'll do this very quickly as well. It's really interesting to look at how revivals change and the pattern of revivals. This is the 2019 pattern. We divided the whole history of theatre into classical, everything up to 1850, the modern period 1850 to the end of the Second World War, and then the post-war period. Okay, and this is kind of how it changed. So the modern era is really squeezed. We stopped programming the modern era. The post-war era really increases, and in fact the classical period is really squeezed as well. We can go into those eras and actually look at what the playwrights are that got revived. These two they're not strictly comparable. With this one I found every playwright from the pre-1850 period who had 2 or more productions. And in this one, it's actually anyone who had anything at all. Okay, so there are some more playwrights who had 1 production revived. And what you can see is the classical repertoire is William Shakespeare in this country. It is the great majority of what is revived from that period. But Molière gets a bit of a go, and John Gay, I presume that is only The Beggar's Opera. I don't know much more beyond that, but they were mad for The Beggar's Opera in 2019.
No Greek.
No Greek. It's mad, isn't it? I mean, there may have been one in that one. Here, there's a Greek, Euripides, but and no, Seneca's not Greek. There we go. And here, this is every single classical author who was revived, and it's a very small number. Okay, so again, William Shakespeare, although it's a smaller number, actually dominates even more that period. I'll do this one very quickly. We can actually show which plays were revived and how many of them. Macbeth turns out to be the most popular play. Lots of reasons for that. Obviously, it's short. It's on the curriculum. It's very bloody, and possibly we looked to Macbeth in the period of the Brexit wars as our image of how we wanted to represent ourselves to the nation. What you can sort of see as well is that the number of Shakespeare plays reduced. So it's a smaller, narrower canon of Shakespeare plays in 2023. And then quickly, I'll just whip through the modern period. That's what it was in 2019. Chekhov and Ibsen, there, 8 productions each. There's a bit J.M. Barrie, I presume that's just lots of Peter Pan. And this is the pattern in 2023. Much smaller number of playwrights getting substantial revivals, and we've moved kind of towards comedy and away from, you know, the sepulchral Ibsenite play. So again, it's a narrowing of the repertoire. And I won't talk about this one, but the same thing is true of post-war revivals. Look at the number of playwrights who got 2 or more revivals from that period in 2019, and that really reduces down to 5 playwrights who get 2 or more productions in the post-COVID period. I think we're near the end. How are women playwrights doing? I mean in the repertoire, not just themselves. I think that'd be a very different study. In 2013 and 2014, we looked at how many women playwrights were in the new play productions, how many new plays were written by women. And in 2013 and 2014, it was exactly the same figure. It was 32%. So it was a very clear glass ceiling at that point. So obviously we were very keen to see how that changed in our later period. In 2019, it's gone up a lot to 39.4%, so nearly 40%. We have I didn't really have non-binary on my radar as a sort of identity marker in 2013 and 14, but now we do add that. And male playwrights just under 60%. And in 2023, that had gone up even further to just under 42% by women, and quite a big jump in non-binary self-identifying playwrights. It's less good news when you look at the other indicators, numbers of performances. You can see that yellow segment is shrinking, and in fact shrinks between the 2 years. Attendances, again, it's smaller and it's shrinking, and similarly for box office, which kind of suggests something about a lack of confidence possibly that people have in programming plays by women. And then I'm going to whip through this one. This is the question you're asking. It's quite difficult for us to compare London and the non-London regions. And the reason for that is just simply we've got such complete data for London that it's always going to look like London is dominating. And it is absolutely dominating the national picture. And you'd expect it. I mean, London is one of the world's great theatre cities. It's not a crime for that to be the case. But actually, if we look through these figures, when you look at numbers of performances, over half of all performances in our data anyway are in London. Attendances, it's over 2/3. And the box office is, I couldn't tell you what that is. It's about 80% of all the box office in our data was received in London. I think I'll stop there. Cheers.
I think that deserves a round of applause. I have to say, I've sat in so many theatre conferences where people who work on performance used to give bone-achingly dry and tedious, and you've taken a whole load of statistics and kind of made them zip and change and everything. So thank you, that was fabulous. In one sense, it's a brilliant success story, isn't it? It's everybody under COVID going, is theatre dead? Can it survive? Can it go? How far do you think this is success of those Arts Council, the Recovery Fund, everything else that's... Is this a story of continuity? Is this a story of things shifting, do you think?
So, this is quantitative. And in quantitative terms, it's a success story, but it's a success that more theatres didn't close. Because, you know, it really looked like a lot of theatres were going to shut their doors permanently. And some have, but the fact that they didn't probably is something about the Arts Council's fund. It probably says, and again, I'm a bit over my skis when I say this, I hope it says something about the resilience of people's desire to go to the theatre. That, you know, they always say that when a theatre, you know, has to close for 6 months because it's revamping its atrium or something, they say it takes an incredibly long time to get that audience back, because they all, as we all sort of found with COVID, you know, people get used to, you know, watching Netflix and, you know, getting Deliveroo and doing other things with their money. But it actually, quite quickly, audiences do seem to have come back. But they are coming back to see different things. So it's not entirely a picture of continuity.
Coming back to see different things makes it sound as they're choosing certain things. Are they coming back to see that, in one sense, the lead-in, if you close a theatre, isn't just getting the audience back, it's also what you start programming. Or what you start, I mean, the most people are programming more than a year ahead, sometimes 2 years ahead.
Yeah.
Or they're trying to get on the circuit for other productions. So 2023 is kind of just the point when that got back up and running, isn't it?
Yes, that's certainly true. I would say that, and probably in 2022 there were some legacy projects that people were still having to sort of felt they were obligated to program. It is absolutely about programming. It doesn't seem, because as I say, attendances go up across the board. So whatever the theatres are programming, more people want to see. But I guess that means that they are programming in a way that is perhaps, you would say, more commercially minded, more audience conscious, and you could say is a little bit more risk averse. You know, I'm not going to say to you that there's anything wrong with doing Oscar Wilde in the theatre, but nonetheless, Oscar Wilde is a sort of IP that people kind of feel warmly disposed to. And I'm not going to say the opposite about Ibsen.
Let's put in Strindberg instead.
Yeah.
Not an obvious feel-good playwright.
Okay. You know, I think there's probably, and it may be nonsense, but I think there probably are feelings among theatre programmers that now is not the time for, you know, another Miss Julie or something. And whereas The Importance of Being Earnest is sort of reliable, funny, sort of feel-good-ish. So yeah, it's. I think it is absolutely about programming, is what we're seeing.
So it's interesting, isn't it, also about what's getting... So some of it is about what companies are choosing to make. So some of the programming was what's the safe, which I think maybe with the Shakespeare is what we're looking at. There's a strong lean there, I think, towards GCSE and A-level texts, maybe.
Yeah, that's probably always been the case. But I mean, it does mean that the fringes of the Shakespeare canon. I mean, fringes of the Shakespeare canon is a bit absurd.
I don't know. I think we can reasonably say Two Gentlemen of Verona is
or Merry Wives of Windsor, something like that. They're slightly dropping away in the later years, so people are more likely to. It's Much Ado About Nothing. It's Midsummer Night's Dream. It's As You
How
Like.
far of that? So there's also been, I mean, the RSC, you know, the kind of Greg Doran do every single play.
Yeah.
How far? Because again, you were saying you can't talk about certain plays because it's one production in one theatre. So you'd be going. How far is that also about? It just takes the RSC doing the whole canon, and you produce, and that project finishes, and then does it? Are there possible influences there on? Or are your numbers much bigger?
That's, I mean, I would think the RSC probably looms quite large in that pie chart. You know, I don't know that this is true, but I noticed that Cymbeline is there in the 2023 figures.
And that was one of the last of Greg Doran's.
Yeah, so I would have thought, kind of, who is going to do that apart from the RSC? So probably at the sort of shallower end of Shakespeare production, probably the RSC is, as it kind of should. Looms quite large.
So again, it depends on the policy there. Will
yeah
shove things even more.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering about dynamic pricing. So when we look at average ticket prices, does everybody know what I mean by dynamic pricing?
Yeah.
So it's whether basically as demand for tickets goes up, prices go up, which is absolutely the way Broadway runs, with kind of no cap on it, hence thousands for Hamilton or whatever.
Yeah.
British theatre hasn't traditionally run on that.
Yeah.
How far, once we have London in there and that huge percentage of taking, is some of that a dynamic price? You know, we've got ways in which the edge of things is really influencing. So you've got some really high tickets, which suggests there's some much cheaper ones in there as well. Maybe much more filling. That at one end you've got really expensive tickets.
Yeah.
At the other end you've got making sure you've got school parties in filling things.
So this is really interesting. So I've shortcut slightly the data in that slide. It isn't actually ticket prices; it's what people paid for tickets, which is different. Because the price on the face of the ticket is not always what people.
So if it's ticket touts and things for London, you mean? Where it's
I mean,
been
not
priced
so much
up?
ticket touts. It's more going to be that if they have what do you call it, reduced price offers,
Right.
or buy one get one free, or
Well, I was listening to Christopher Eccleston talking about theatre in schools, which we'll come to in a minute, and there was a teacher on there saying, on getting the kids to the theatre, said, I can get 100 tickets for take a school party for the cost of a family of 4.
yeah,
I mean, that I was just thinking, what does that do to your figures? But also, there's some very weird things happening.
yeah, that's right, and what that also means is and this is slightly tentative, but there is some evidence that the top price tickets have astronomically shot up, and that nobody's buying them, which is weird because you'd think a sort of market sensitive theatre would eventually go, you know what, let's forget these £600 premium seats. But it seems that the premium seat thing, which is a relatively contemporary phenomenon, they seem to they put them there because the bankers who go, let's go and see this show that everyone's talking about, that might happen once a month, so they may as well keep those seats there. They will also then function as house seats if they don't get sold, and then somebody in the company wants to invite somebody.
Lovely seat then.
Yeah, exactly. So
Is there also a psychology, like they used to say, that the second most expensive thing on the menu that certain people will always buy? So if you're not buying, you've saved money by not buying the ridiculously expensive one. So you're splashing out on the second or third tier one, and they need that to push people up to the other.
It's perfectly possible, yeah. That may
We're
be
not
the
in
case.
marketing, but I have no doubt.
So it does look like. So if you just look at the top price seats, that is massively inflated, in the sense that, I mean, I can sort of remember 20 years ago, I think you would be very hard pressed to spend £100, even in a West End theatre. It'd be really difficult to do that. Now it's quite hard not to. Well, there are seats, but there are lots of seats that are above 100, above 200, above 300.
And they're an interesting one in some of those, the kind of Andrew Scott in Vanya or Sarah Snook in Picture of Dorian Gray.
Yes.
And so on. They become kind of, I mean, they're extraordinary actors, so it's not a celebrity thing in a simple term. But they're interesting that you have to be there, you have to see it, the thing to...
Yeah, and I guess they, I mean, again, this is not something that's captured by the box office data, but one of the things that would be very interesting to study is, no, I was about to say stunt casting. It's not stunt casting because, as you say, these are Andrew Scott is an extraordinary actor, and you would love to see that. But what's her name who did The Tempest? The woman in Alien.
Sigourney Weaver?
Sigourney Weaver was in The Tempest at the West End, and by all accounts, I didn't see it, so this is very unfair. She's not born for the stage, but it sold very well because, of course, it sells before all the all the reviews come in. So that's another way of trying to push people's purchasing earlier, and completely understandably.
Though that predates COVID by a long way, doesn't it?
Yeah, sure.
So celebrity casting's been happening for forever.
It has, but I do think there's something slightly more upfront about it at the moment.
I'm also interested in, so data I presume you haven't got on things like, on that booking a long way ahead.
Yeah.
That means, so for drama, so the example you gave was sort of Evita with, what's the face? Rachel Ziegler, which then got huge publicity and is all known about. A lot of drama, a lot of local drama, unless you're really efficient and you're a member, you're in one of those sort of, like National Theatre, you're whatever the membership is, so you get the publicity well ahead. 5 months ahead is not a point you always know what's going to be on.
Yeah, I think they're probably those really big shows. They do tend to have a bit of a splash of publicity a year at least in advance, and they open the booking early. And what's really interesting is actually looking at the way that some other kinds of theatres are trying to do this. In November, I think it was, the Royal Court, which is absolutely plays and new plays almost entirely, opened up their entire whole of 2026. So I have booked for, I think, even something in January 2027. And normally with the Royal Court, I think the traditional thinking would be you want the boost of publicity to say we are announcing our autumn season. But they've presumably realised that that actually is much less useful than getting lots of money up front. And I guess they also think, well, we can sort of spike the publicity by announcing who's directing it or announcing the cast, and and then you'll get the reviews and so on. So there's a sort of hopefully a rising trajectory, but also they got money in the bank at the beginning.
Yeah.
Which I think it's hard to underestimate how important that is.
Well, it's also money they can then use for the next things they're doing. So it's a really interesting in how theatres run.
But maybe also alarmingly, they can kind of go, that show is not selling very well. Let's reduce that one's budget because that's a sign that this is perhaps not going to be the one that is going to make us keep our head above water. So there's a lot riding on things like titles and short blurbs and things like
And
that.
trying to read the mood as well. What people get. I mean, as you said with Shakespeare, a lot more comedy
Yes.
in there, along with your sort of Macbeth.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thought, actually, because, again, I mean, I know the Royal Court doesn't actually instantly programme, but that sort of sense that, they might, in the olden days, they might at this point still be going, a play has come in that's about ice, or that's about an international banker who's a sexual predator or something. We could probably capture that moment if we program it in September. But now they are committed to the whole year, so they can't be that
responsive theatre is getting squeezed out in that sense. Yeah. And can I ask about new writing?
Yeah.
Have you got any sense? So it's not new writing necessarily by women that's getting squeezed out. That's fabulously, finally, having plateaued for a really long time, growing. Any sense of what kind of new writing is getting squeezed out?
So obviously, there's new writing is very healthy, but there is new writing in the musical. There's new writing in adaptations. There's new writing in pantomime and so on.
And also film adaptation, which became a big thing. Book adaptation. There's a kind of which isn't always very new writing. Sometimes artistically incredible, sometimes less so.
Yeah, I mean, we would treat a new adaptation of prior existing content as new work.
Because it's another Pride and Prejudice or Emma or something like that.
Yeah, even if it is, but it is new. It's not a revival of work people did before. So that's important. The adaptations are hugely up. That's probably also driven by the rise of new musicals, because almost all musicals are adaptations of some existing form, but also adaptations are popular if you're being commercially minded, because again, you've got name recognition, it's high noon, people will have heard of that, a couple of stars in it, people have heard of them, and so we are likely to get people driving to to the website and booking. So yeah, adaptation. So it's plays. Plays are where it's all reduced. New plays in particular.
And new plays at smaller venues or small. I mean, is this part of the post-COVID in that we're looking now at bigger venues, better filled.
Yeah.
But a lot of post-COVID, the people who left the profession were often the freelancers who weren't covered.
Yes.
For a long time. I mean, they started being so, but that's when the theatres started using some of their money on the freelancers.
Yeah.
They were kind of missed out, and as self-employed freelancers, not really covered by furlough either. So
no, that's right.
a lot is that a sense? Do you think that's fed into this shrinking of venues?
Yeah, I think there are lots and lots of things, and it's actually slightly hard to read the runes on it because, in a sense, all we know is the size of a theatre, and of course, lots of theatres reconfigure the size of their auditoriums per show, because they're flexible spaces. We generally find that on average, theatres are bigger, which means people are tending to configure their auditoriums to be larger, which doesn't exactly mean that smaller theatres have disappeared. It just means that sort of theatres are seating more people. I would say what we don't have in our data is, for example, the Independent Theatre Council, which would cover pub theatres and those sorts of really small studio networks, and that would be fascinating to look at because obviously I don't know if they have the kind of data that we're talking about, but it'd be really interesting to see what the state of those places are. I mean, we know that. I mean, I'm just thinking because it was quite recent. The CCA in Glasgow has just announced it's closed. The Arches also announced it's closed, and those are two absolute small-scale but engines of innovation in that city. And I'm sure we can think of, can't offhand, but think of examples of that maybe that are more familiar to us.
Yeah. So just before I hand over to everybody else for questions, just asking if there's a sense, in one sense, the growth of musicals.
Yeah.
If we're thinking the growth of musicals it's Hamilton and it's Six and it's kind of things that are pushing the envelope and exciting and new and young or different, then yay, new musicals. Yeah. If we're thinking we're now where theatre it survived, but how far it's having to depend much more on a kind of commercial box office input. And are we looking at the 1980s when government subsidy under Thatcher shrank massively, and it was the era of Andrew Lloyd Webber, and actually theatre, if theatre's healthy, then it pays for itself. Or is that two different? Do you think they're elements of both? What's your kind of sense of where we are now?
So, I mean, the first thing I'd say is that I don't hold to the view that musicals are of themselves a bad thing. I think there are great, extraordinary, wonderful musicals, and what I think is really exciting is that the big growth in musicals is new musicals, and that's kind of interesting. I mean, it's new work. It's new work. It's people writing new songs and telling those stories in a new way. So that's very good. I mean, there are clearly London has a lot of long-running musicals. I mean, that's why London has so many attendances in that share, because the phenomenon of the long run is pretty much a London thing. It's Les Miserables being in the same theatre, playing every single day for a year.
Our averages are kind of interesting, aren't they? There.
Yeah, that's right.
Masses of overseas tourists.
Yeah, of course, absolutely.
Which you don't get elsewhere for the theatre.
That's completely right. I mean, there's I think it's in the report. There's a bit where I try and compare the amount of theatre activity to populations in the regions, and London looks kind of way out. But if you actually put in the visiting tourist trade, actually London's got about the right amount of theatre to serve that enormous. I mean, it's something like, I'm plucking it from memory, it's something like 49 million people, something like that, which, you know, dwarfs the resident population of London. So yeah, absolutely. It's that's, and it's, as I say, it's a world theatre city. So you would expect it to have a lot of work, but it's a London phenomenon.
So are you saying the new musicals are mostly London?
No, long-running musicals.
Yeah.
Long-running shows are
But-
London phenomenon.
So ultimately, did this report, along with some wonderfully sort of unexpected things, did it, in really simple terms, did it make you optimistic about where we're heading back for? Do you feel we're heading in a slightly different direction? Like we survived, but it's heading in a slightly different direction?
I wouldn't go as far as optimistic.
Always be dangerous.
I mean, I think look, I like theatre in a slightly simplistic way. I am really happy that theatre is successful, and I kind of feel like, you know, you can make theatre riskier again once the finances are settled out. So I think that's very good. I'd rather a theatre was open with a long-running production of Guys and Dolls than it was closed. But I also think it would be interesting if it had a new musical at some point in the future, sort of thing. So the really important thing is I want to do the next 2 years. I want to do 2024 and 2025 to see whether 2023 is a blip or whether we have actually seen a sort of what might appear to be a permanent shift in the makeup of the repertoire.
And some of that will be what's being commissioned and what people are making in advance and how far they're saying,
Yeah,
this is how it looks, and so this is what we need to supply.
yeah, absolutely.
Fabulous. Over to questions.
Did you look at the age profile of the audiences?
I'm afraid we didn't.
Because when I go to the theatre, I look around and I don't see many young people, except sweethearts sometimes. But I do worry about that.
Yeah, I mean, I know what you mean, but I can't give you any data on that.
And I think often our age group go to performances which our age group goes to, like matinee. I mean, like midweek matinee or. No, I don't know. I'm just. Well, I was at the Playhouse on Saturday night and I was thrilled. It was completely full, and it was really quite a mixed audience. So it felt good.
I think you could also say theatres are very, very aware of that. So they know they have to cultivate a younger audience. They have to reach out. Those are the theatre goers they're going to need.
Yeah.
So, but it is. Kirsten.
Just quick follow-up. Thank you so much. And the report does mention that you've omitted anything about the ATG group with its 20 theatres. Is that right?
Yeah.
And I was just wondering if you could speak to that and how that might actually, taking that into account, would it shift things? Would it?
So the Ambassadors Theatre Group are we've got their theatres in London, but they are very wary of their data because they have lots of theatres across the non-London regions, and they're very concerned that their work might be identified. I have spoken to them many times about how we protect their data, but currently they're refusing to do it. If we had their data, we'd have a much fuller picture of the non-London regions. And so I really hope if we get to do the next one, we can possibly persuade them, because that would just, I'd feel much more secure about what I'm saying about, you know, the East, West Midlands, and, you know, the Northeast, Northern Ireland, and so on, and Wales.
Yeah.
So yeah, it'd be great to get them.
That's interesting.
David.
Yeah, following up on the rise of the musical, which is obviously a big change. I mean, there's lots of other cultural factors at work with music streaming and breakdown of political consensus and the mushrooming of music theatre training courses and all the rest of it. So, sort of, where does COVID fit into that story? Where is the other trends at work over this sort of 4 or 5 year period, and what's actually the impact of COVID on phenomena like that?
Well, sort of, I have a slightly David Humean position on that, which is I'm not observing causality. I'm observing one thing happening and then something else happening. So I can't say that it's COVID that has produced the rise of the musical or the rise of the new musical. My speculation is that so many theatres were on the brink of bankruptcy, and they have thought, and they may be wrong about this, but they have thought that the surest way to rebuild their reserves and be able to continue is by putting on things that have a sort of known commercial profile and that people book early for. But the other things you're talking about, I'm sure might well be equally important. They might be more important. I would think the sort of mushrooming of, you're right, there is a sort of great increase in musical theatre courses, but I would think that would be a little bit later. We'd see the effects of that. It'd be interesting. The idea that our sort of splintered, polarised political consensus means that everybody wants to go and see Six, possibly. I think you'd have to make that case. That's not self-evidently true to me. I think in some ways, I half joke when I say the thing about Macbeth, but I think there is possibly a sense in which, Macbeth does kind of feel a bit more like the world we've been living in for 10 years than A Midsummer Night's Dream. Oh, I don't know, actually. No, anyway.
Discuss.
Yeah, hi.
If you were to do another one, are there different categories you'd like to label differently? Like, obviously you have your classical stuff like that, but would you like to do genre, for example, or some stuff like that? Or
in a sense, I don't want to change it because, in a sense, for comparability, it's really good to be able to say, we've got our 7 categories, we've divided them up in the same way so that we can start to become longitudinal the more we do these things. Genre is interesting, but genre can often be very interpretive. So we have, there is a chart in the thing about Shakespeare's genres in there, and we talk about the fact that Shakespeare's histories were the most common type of Shakespeare play to be performed in 2019, and we thought this was very witty. During COVID, when tragedy overtook history, and then tragedy in 2023 is the modal form of Shakespeare play. But we obviously in that we had to deal with. We basically had comedy, tragedy, history, and then other. We didn't want to get into how you label all those other plays.
Problem play,
pastoral, blah blah blah. So, and that I think would be difficult because even sort of saying comedy is quite, there are lots of plays that go, well, I laughed quite a lot during it, but that ending is not funny. So I sort of think we'd end up with sort of it'd be very, very hard to maintain consistency across the whole data set, I think.
Questions?
I wanted to make a comment that this building, the Schwarzman, I expect many of you are on the mailing list, is going the way of wanting money early because I've been being bombarded with concerts. Long before I've even seen the concert hall. I found in the end I succumb and I booked tickets and I booked them before Christmas for next November, and I don't even know which seats I want to sit in because I've never seen it.
Yeah, right, yeah.
So it's obviously going the way that the theatres want to in terms of money up front.
Yeah, I'm sure that's true, and it's very widespread. I think the Orange Tree did it as well. It's another theatre I quite often go to, but they've announced an enormous booking period in advance, and I'm sure we'll find that. Well, we'll either find that is just the way everything goes, in the same way like paper theatre tickets sort of slightly disappeared, and they're never coming back. Or it might just be that they kind of go, you know what, our finances are all right, let's allow ourselves to be a bit more responsive. And only by doing another report will I know.
Do you have to do 24 and 25? Couldn't you just do 25? That would halve the sort of work and cost.
The data is sitting there. I have a sort of. I like the data. I'd quite like to have a. It'd be really good to have a 23, 24, 25 run and just really to be able to see what the fluctuations are. You know,
because then you can get you get a direction then rather than
yeah, that's right.
assuming that it's moved to here.
So if we found that 2025 was the same as 23, we wouldn't know whether. I mean, there could be a pattern where every other year something totally different happens than people correct.
Okay.
So yeah, that's why.
Really interesting. Thank you so much. I'm sorry I haven't read the report yet. I was just wondering if there's any data about the international works in productions visiting London or any other theatre.
So we don't have stuff on visiting companies, but we do have stuff about foreign plays in translation. And the news is really dreadful that the number of translated plays in translation has, it was never good, and it's tanked. I mean, there's a tiny number of plays done in, particularly in new translations. So I think that's alarming. I mean, that's a slight sign of parochialism. It's possibly also a sort of risk-averse thing. I mean, it's sort of. I also think, I don't want to be unfair to the theatres. We should all be fairly risk-averse in our lives. You know what I mean? So it's not demanding that theatres put their finances on the line for certain types of theatre is a bit weird. But and you can clearly see. I mean, the thing is with a new play, the thing I love about new plays is that they're unknown quantities, and that when I go and see a new play at the Royal Court, I sit there thinking I have no idea what story I'm going to be told and how exciting that is. But I appreciate I'm a slightly unusual person to that extent. People are very unlikely on the whole. Well, we'll see what the Royal Court experiment is like in terms of the early booking. But I think probably a lot of people go, it sounds interesting, but let's find out who's in it, or even wait for the reviews, or see if they're on a roll of good work. You know what I mean? And it's hard to blame somebody for that.
But you've also got the peripheral costs. So you go from here to theatre in London, and you're paying the travel, you're paying everything else as you do it. So we looked at the ticket price, but the peripheral costs also go up.
Yeah, of course, that's absolutely true. And London is so dependent not just on foreign tourists, but actually British tourists, going, we're going to go to London for the weekend and see 3 shows or something like that. And it's perfectly understandable that somebody would go, I love Guys and Dolls, so let's definitely book for that. And I saw The Lion King 25 years ago, but let's do that again for nostalgia's sake. Here's a violent new play at the Royal Court about sexual predators.
It hasn't yet been reviewed. So
it hasn't been reviewed. Yeah. I mean, it's a hard sell,
And actually, on the foreign productions, I certainly know because the Playhouse used to get a lot of overseas productions, and they could sell every single ticket, and it cost them money, and they did it because they wanted the Marley Theatre of St Petersburg here, or they wanted. Cheek by Jowl, bring Le Bouffe du Nord, whatever, but it cost them, and they did. So I think theatres at the moment cannot afford to do that, but they will be. I think a lot of them want to. So some of this is one of the questions: how far this is refilling the bank accounts, getting the reserves up again, and it's interesting on the pre-booking. So if you think of them as businesses, in one sense, every ticket sold in advance is them in debt. So they're in debt to the audit. Do you sort of
right? Yeah.
Which is an interesting. If you look at most theatres in that sense, like a standard business, they should all be in the hands of the receivers. But it doesn't work like that. We think of it in a different way. So that buying the tickets ahead is actually a very different kind of transaction. It's not like putting your deposit down for the car you want to have or something, or paying for your your product in advance quite the same way. So it's a really interesting way of thinking about it.
Yeah.
Last question, or are we there?
I just
Yeah.
I mean, it's very interesting. I mean, at the moment, I guess the Orange Tree and the Royal Court. And whether or not I've been to them is irrelevant, but the programme they're putting up and the confidence with which they do it, and the sense that this is a well curated, well dramaturged, that you don't want to miss that when it comes. It's high risk in case they come off with a lot of 2-star reviews for the first two. And it's also very interesting that they can't be very nimble when it comes to a really current scene that really demands to be written about, like you mentioned about ice. But it does appear to be, it makes those theatres very enticing to visit because there's a real confidence, and they also tend to give you an exciting performer, an exciting director, something there, and you start to think this is the place to go.
I think that's a brilliant point, actually, that there is an artistic advantage to showing your repertoire a year in advance, because actually there is that thing, and I think they are very good at that at the moment with Tom Littler, is going, wow, this is a really exciting vision of what the theatre is going to be like for the next year. I kind of want to be part of this, which is more difficult to do if you only announce 4 shows. So I think that is a really interesting point. I mean, the Orange Tree, I don't know why I'm particularly publicising the Orange Tree, except they are just about to open a Strindberg, so that's taking the plunge.
I think it's already all sold out as well.
Is it? Yeah, probably is. But they're also doing that thing of, it's not stunt casting at all, but they're certainly really, Roger Allam, for example, sort of that kind of casting that means that people go, oh, I love Roger Allam, so I will go and see a new play by Howard Brenton because if nothing else, I can just enjoy Roger Allam, and that's a perfectly good way of going to the theatre.
Which is also interesting because they do relatively short runs, which means you can get amazing people for just those few weeks.
Yeah.
In that sense, the long run is a very different proposition for actors tied into, and so on. So there are all sorts of different things happening there in the ecology.
Yeah, that's right. I think what they're finding is they would love to have a West End transfer, but the problem is the kind of actors that they can attract can absolutely pack out the Orange Tree, but probably Roger Allam on his own, or even David Suchet, who I think is going to be there, probably on his own can't sell a West End run. So they're now slightly caught in that difficult place where they kind of go, we'd really like Keira Knightley to be in, Miss Julie. But Keira Knightley's probably never going to do the Orange Tree.
And also, will they commit if they're going to be offered much better paid work, film work or TV work, once they're caught into a long? So there's a really interesting deal that's being done in that. Fabulous. So much we could talk about and so much we could do thought, but thank you, Dan. That was just fantastic.
Thank you. Brilliant.